Well, hello again, everybody. It's Dan McTeague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Well, like everyone else, all interested in the that wonderful baffle gab or confab or whatever you want to call it that came out of Davos, which just ended last week. We know that annually this organization comes together. Not sure exactly why it comes together, but it's not like the UN. It's certainly not like some forum in which governments and other leaders appear. Although one can't dismiss the idea that the World Economic Forum, the WEF, is sometimes confused with the WWF. When you think about some of the maudlin comments that come from there, it's no wonder it's faux and staged. But I think for a lot of people, it's actually coming down to WTF. Who do these people think they are? And why is Canada supporting it? The World Economic Forum isn't new. And of course, I know some of its origins. One of the campaigns, the first ones I worked on in 1978, 79, was in a little riding called Scarborough Centre. We had a candidate named Morris Strong. He's the granddaddy of all this, not Carl Schwab. And he's the one that thought this would be a great idea to have some kind of uber, government, supra government, or at least governance in the minds and eyes of people. And so while I'm concerned about climate and green policies, what concerns me, and I think concerns all of us about the WEF, is that it is really not about espousing policies as much as it is diktats and trying to find ways to control governmental agendas. It does, in fact, run very counter to the idea of sovereignty, and it does concern many that this is an order that is really designed to subvert and to replace and to displace elected governments around the world with some form of unknown, very bizarre policies that might not have been considered just a couple of years ago, for which there is no need other than those who have an interesting agenda. What concerns me is not just the federal government's contribution. We have our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, showing up there as not only a guest host, but she's actually a director of this organization. We know that Mark Carney is a intimate of that particular organization. We see several of our chartered banks officials there. That's not to say that they shouldn't have an opportunity to talk to like-minded people around the world, but to then propose policies that governments are presupposed to have engaged in or who should be engaging in, I think is misleading. No one has given any type of legitimacy to this organization democratically as far as Canada's participation. And so I find it appalling that NDP, Liberal, and other organizations, usually Green, tend to be somewhat subservient, and they're showing up at this particular organization. By the way, it has $680 billion. Where'd that money come from? Where is it being spent? Is the agenda really about control of individuals, digital currencies, the agile nation charter, which I think conservative members like Leslyn Lewis have quite rightly chided and pointed out is overreach? What is the mandate? What is the purpose and what is the intent? Because it certainly can't be about greening policies. And when they fly in on all their jets and their helicopters, there's no doubt that their carbon footprint is substantial. So it has to be about someone having the ability to control and to order policies that I think are nefarious. And I think at the end of the day, not the kind of things that are the interests of sovereign democratic representation in countries like Canada. And Canadians will be well advised whether that be, and by the way, I have worked foreign affairs for our government representing Canadians abroad. So I'm not saying this, out of hand. This is a concern that any organization should wield unusual and unwarranted powers and influence over policymakers when the public has not had an opportunity to understand, much less vote on, or at least give approval for some of the policies that are being espoused and advocated. And it's the type of thing, by the way, that leads to a challenge to affordability, leads to a challenge to our prosperity, leads to a challenge to the resources that Canada is producing and providing the rest of the world. Look, we're a nation that developed and enhanced the United Nations formula. We were the first to provide, a framework for the Charter of the UN that would allow for the Declaration of Independence of Human Rights. All those are important, but they seem to be at odds and subverted by a group of elites who show up every once in a year to rub shoulders, swill back, a Perrier and eat some canapes, at our expense. My concern isn't that an organization like this exists. My greater concern is that it has the ability to influence beyond our democratic principles, beyond the sovereignty of the nation, the public policies that are being pursued. To that extent, and understanding its origins, as I mentioned earlier, I have grave concerns, and we at Canadians for Affordable Energy will continue to talk about this and demonstrate that it is time for governments to break free from this idea that they have to be part of an organization for which the objective is certainly not your and my public interest. On that score, keep watching, keep supporting, and we'll continue to emphasize the WTF about the WEF. That's it for this week. Talk to you shortly.